Good evening. It sounds like the to-do list from hell. 60,000 tests and checks still need to be completed before Crossrail can open. So it is perhaps unsurprising that its new boss can't put a date on it. The £17 billion line should have been opened by the Queen before Christmas, but it is so behind schedule. The only guarantee Mark Wilde could give us today was that it definitely will not be opening this year. Well, he spoke exclusively to our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
If the signs are to be believed, the next train to Abbey Wood is almost here. But everything else about this station tells you that's wishful thinking. This is Liverpool Street, one of 10 new Crossrail stations which are far from finished.
What you can see in the track here are the intricate signalling equipment that we're testing at the minute.
Mark Wilde is the man with a plan. Crossrail's new boss was hired in November to rescue the troubled £17 billion project. First, he needs to finish the building work and then test the technology, from fire alarms and public address systems to the trains and signals. And only then will it be safe for the Elizabeth line to finally open.
I'm working on a plan at the moment, and it shouldn't be too long before we're able to say when that will be.
So you don't yet have a date for when the railway might open?
We don't, because I made a decision with my team to, when we do declare a date, to be very certain about it.
Can you say for certain that it will open before the end of 2020?
I don't know yet, actually. I would very much hope so. I can say for certain that I don't think there's any chance of it opening in 2019.
Last month, the serious business of testing trains in the tunnels began, more than a year behind schedule. One of the biggest technical challenges is developing the software which allows the trains and signals to talk to each other. It's likely to take months. For businesses like the pizza chain Franco Manca, the uncertainty isn't just annoying, it's expensive. Crossrail was part of its business plan. Around 20 of its restaurants aren't doing as well as expected because of the delayed opening. The chairman estimates takings are down by a quarter. They're saying hopeful before the end of 2020.
Hopeful's not very good if you're running a business. We can't live in hope.
What effects does it have on your staff?
We staff up. We have the same thing with developers who promise us a site from their development and then it doesn't happen. You employ people and then you have to let them go.
Until the end of last August, Londoners were assured Crossrail would open as planned in December 2018. How could anyone coming down here in the past 6 months, how could anyone have thought that the railway would be ready for December?
Well, my job is to look forward, I suppose, Simon. I just want to look forward and getting a plan together.
But for now, the ticket barriers are boarded up, the escalators are switched off, and the train information screens are talking to themselves.
Simon, 60,000 tests and checks still to do. I mean, that's an incredible amount of work.
Yeah, it gives you some idea of the challenge facing those trying to finish the project sometime in the next year or so. 60,000 different components and systems that need to be integrated, tested and approved before the railway can open. And a lot of that work can't start until they finish the building work at the stations, and that's not due to happen now until the summer. Then there's the testing of the trains. That's a long way behind schedule. We were at Liverpool Street Station today, which is one of the more advanced. I'm told some of them are far further behind, like Bond Street. So there's a huge amount of work to do. And even when the railway does finally open, it'll be another 6 months before it opens out to the east into Essex, and another 6 months after that before trains run out to Berkshire and Heathrow Airport.
Goodness me, a bit of a long wait. Simon, thank you. One of London's commuting routes will be closed for the rest of the working week. It's all because of a landslide on the line that links central London to Dartford via Bexley Heath. It's thought rain led to 400 tonnes of soil and trees sliding onto the tracks at Barnhurst, as our correspondent Simon Harris reports.
It might not look like much, but this pile of mud is enough to shut a busy commuter line for a week. Today, Network Rail engineers began clearing up after the landslide in Bexley Heath. A few hundred yards down the line at Barnhurst Station, Sue Young Leem, a student from Korea, was trying to work out how to get to London Bridge.
I'm here for 10 days only, so it's really annoying that I have to, spend 2-3 hours just to get into town and then, waste all that time just on travelling.
Trying to get to university, and unfortunately the trains are not running today for a whole week, and I'm devastated.
Network Rail reckons 400 tonnes of trees and soil slid down the embankment and onto the track. This is a part of London where commuters really struggle when the railway doesn't run. There's no tube out here, and the phrase rail replacement bus service is never welcome. And it's not just passengers who are affected. Carly Slipper runs a shop on the station forecourt.
It's a nightmare, basically. No passing trade whatsoever while the station's shut.
What have they told you?
Well, they've said it was a day, first of all, then 2, now they're saying a week. So that's a whole week with no business, yeah.
In a letter to people living next to the line, Network Rail described the clear-up as part of an upgrade plan to deliver a better railway. That left some amused, others unimpressed.
They're saying that this is planned work. It seriously isn't planned work, is it? I really feel for our residents. I'm having to go up tomorrow myself. I was a commuter for over 30 years. I know that the pressure you put on yourself to get to work on time.
Landslips aren't just inconvenient. This one near Watford 3 years ago left 2 people injured when a train hit it. Daphne Cottenham has lived next to the railway in Bexley Heath for almost 70 years. She remembers when there were no trees, no leaves on the line and no landslides.
In those days they used to come along regularly, renew the fencing, boundary fencing at the tops of the gardens. They used to keep all the undergrowth on the other side trimmed down in case of sparks from the steam trains caught light.
Moving the mud and trees is only part of the clear-up. Network Rail plans to reinforce the embankment by hammering steel piles into the ground and building a retaining wall out of concrete.
And Simon joins me now from London Bridge Station, where commuters heading home from there face a much longer journey. Simon, this isn't the first time there's been a landslide on this stretch of track.
Nina, this section of railway cutting between Bexley Heath and Barnhurst does seem especially vulnerable. Right next to where the landslip happened, there's a concrete wall, and the embankment above it has been stripped of vegetation and covered in wire mesh. That's the result of an identical landslide in 2016, and people living next to the railway say there have been others too. In the past, they were encouraged, apparently, to throw their garden rubbish over the fence to help build the embankment back up. That's not how Network Rail tackles these things nowadays. It's very much an engineering operation with teams out working night and day, which is why the railway has to stay shut, much to the frustration of people heading home from here tonight.
Fascinating detail. Simon Harris, thank you very much. Thank you. Next this evening, what would £50 million get Londoners? Well, that is the full cost of the failed attempt to build a garden bridge over the river behind me. Most of that is taxpayers' money, and yet not a single stone or tree was ever planted. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is here. Simon.
Nina, many of London's big infrastructure projects have a habit of going over budget, but the Garden Bridge is unique. It's cost tens of millions of pounds with nothing to show for it. We now know precisely how much. The project was scrapped in 2017 after Sadiq Khan withdrew his backing. The tree-lined footbridge had been championed and partially bankrolled by his predecessor, Boris Johnson. Today, Transport for London revealed the figures from its latest audit. The final bill for the bridge is £53.5 million. That includes £43 million of public money, taxpayers' money, our money. Almost £23 million went on consultants and lawyers' fees. More than £400,000 was spent on a gala dinner to raise funds. And the Garden Bridge Trust's website cost £160,000. TfL says none of this money can be recovered.
We aren't going to see that money back. In fact, further £5.5 million is going to be spent from the public purse, from the government purse, just to finish bailing out some of the debts from the charity. You know, the charity needs to be looked at, and charity law in general, but also how Transport for London could have allowed money to be given to this charity when really it wasn't delivering what it was supposed to be.
Many people who donated money to the Garden Bridge Trust did so on the grounds that the bridge would be built. Now, that money has to be repaid too. It includes £3,200 pledged by a couple who bid at a charity auction to play a game of table tennis with Boris Johnson. According to the accounts, the prize was not delivered, so there's a contractual obligation to repay. Nina.
Simon, thank you.
Good evening. Now, it was a story that dominated headlines during February half-term back in 2015. The Bethnal Green schoolgirls who left home and travelled to Syria to join ISIS. The teenagers had been groomed online, and when they left, they were aged only between 14 and 16 years old. One of the girls was killed in Syria, but now in an interview, another one, a heavily pregnant Shamima Begum, says she wants to come home. But the security minister says officials will not be going to get her, and that's divided opinion. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
For Shamima Begum, this is the reality, life in the refugee camps of northern Syria. For Shamima Begum, this is the fantasy, a return to her old life in London's East End. She spent 4 years as a so-called jihadi bride. 2 of her children have died. She's about to give birth to a third.
After my 2 kids died, now I'm really overprotective of this baby. I'm scared that this baby's going to get sick in this camp. That's why I really want to get back to Britain, because I know it will be taken care of.
Shamima Begum was 15 when she and 2 other East End schoolgirls ran away to join Islamic State. These CCTV pictures showed them travelling through Turkey before crossing the border into Syria. All 3 girls went to Bethnal Green Academy. Not long after their disappearance made headlines, the school changed its name, and today no one from the academy wanted to talk. When the 3 girls disappeared, the authorities promised they would be treated as victims, not terrorists, if they came home.
They have no reason to fear that if there's nothing else comes to light, no reason to fear that we'll be treating them as terrorists if they come back to this country.
Gina Vale is an academic at London's King's College who studies radicalisation. She says Miss Begum will be questioned by police, but not necessarily prosecuted.
There is no evidence to suggest that she actively participated in violence, whether through combat or any other means.
Does she deserve to be allowed back into the UK?
She has a legal and moral right to return to the UK. She is a British citizen.
But she might not be allowed to fulfil her dream of bringing up her child in familiar surroundings.
The child is the innocent individual in all of this, and she may not be aware that when a child comes back that the child may be taken into care.
Miss Begum also confirmed one of the schoolgirls didn't survive. Khadija Sultana was killed in an airstrike.
Her house got bombed and other people got killed as well. At first I was in denial, because I always thought if we ever did get killed, we would get killed together.
She might be desperate to come back to Bethnal Green. She might have lost 2 children and a friend. But the former East End schoolgirl said of her time with Islamic State, "I don't regret it."
Well, you just mentioned it there. She says she doesn't regret going to Syria at all, but she does want to come home. I mean, is that likely to happen? And if she does come here, what will happen then?
Well, it's not going to be easy for her. The government has made it clear that they're not prepared to risk the lives of British diplomats, sending them into a war zone to rescue her. So she, first of all, will have to find her way out of the refugee camp and out of Syria to a British consular embassy in another country before she gets back home. If she does get here, the police have made it clear that they will want to question her. They need to be sure that she doesn't pose a possible terrorist threat or that she's likely to try to radicalise other people. After all, by her own admission, she's still faithful to the ideals of Islamic State. I also asked Tower Hamlets what would happen if she came back to her old part of town. Would she, for instance, be eligible to go on the Council House waiting list? And they said they will work with the police and the Home Office to assess her needs and those of her child before any decision is made.
OK, Simon, thanks very much.